chamber leadership, okay, of Morristown Group. And if you would please stand up in the back. I don't know how many of you are. But we welcome you. They're here to observe the City Council's actions today and learn a little bit more about the city. I appreciate you coming to the meeting. You really do. And the chamber leadership program is super appropriate. The next thing I want to talk about is we are going to do things just a little different than we have in the past, and that is we are going to use, in our voting, we're going to use a request to speak button that we haven't used prior to this. And the way that will work is if someone wants to speak to a motion, they will request to speak, it will show up, you'll see it on the monitors in the back and up here. And then we will call for those speakers as they are in sequence for requesting to speak. Hopefully this will make it easier to follow and you'll know what's coming up. But first, we have no proclamations today. We do have a public hearing though. It will be on adoption of ordinance number 3428. This will be the public portion, or public hearing portion of this ordinance. It is entitled an ordinance to designate a chief administrative officer and a substitute officer for purposes of dealing with civil emergencies. This particular ordinance came up when we found that there was some ambiguity between city code of the city of Morristown and then the city charter. In the past, it has been understood that the mayor, and by city code, would be the chief administrative officer for designated emergencies by code. But when you go by charter, we found that it had to be designated. This came about when there was a request by 4 council members to take the phone from the mayor. The mayor went to the city attorney to ask him how we could clarify that as so we would know exactly where we stand. And that's how this came about. And I will read it to you. And then if you wish to address it in public hearing, you may. It's ordinance number 3428, being an ordinance to designate a chief administrative officer and a substitute officer for purposes of dealing with civil emergencies. Whereas Tennessee Code annotated section 38-9-101, in the future I will not read that number, grants certain authority to the chief administrative officer of Tennessee cities in the event of civil emergencies. Whereas it would appear that these statutes designate the city administrator as the chief administrative officer under Morristown's form of government. And whereas the code provides that any municipality, however, may be ordinance, specially designate any official as chief administrative officer for purpose of this chapter. And whereas it mandates that each city in this state shall by ordinance designate a substitute officer for the purposes of this chapter. What we found is that had not been done in the charter, so that was the purpose of this. So therefore, be it ordained by the City Council of the City of Morristown, Tennessee, that the city administrator be designated as a chief administrative officer and the city of Morristown for the purposes of Title 38, Chapter 9 of the Tennessee Code. Further resolved that the mayor be designated as the substitute officer for the city of Morristown, pursuant to the Tennessee Code annotated. All right, and that's what that is all about. And we will now open.
Mayor, point of order, please.
Yes.
In the minutes that we just approved, we agreed on October 14th with the advice of Councilor Jesse. It's on the 4th page back in the minutes, that we would pass this today without a public hearing. A public hearing was not required.
I thought we passed without a public hearing the office matter, not the.
This is
the
no, sir. It's in the minutes right here. Councilmember Center made a motion to complete ordinance number 3428, which you just addressed, with the following: designate the city administrator as chief administrative officer and the mayor as substitute, and to pass said ordinance on first reading relative to the second and final reading on October the 18th without a public hearing. Councilmember LaBelle seconded the motion and cast all voting aye.
All right, I forgot all about that. Sorry. I read this as a public hearing and ordinance to be a public hearing. So you are correct. Stand corrected. In that case, we will have a motion. We'll entertain a motion.
I
for the
move
final reading.
You ready?
I will entertain a motion for the final reading and adoption of ordinance 3428, entitled an ordinance to designate a chief administrative officer and a substitute officer for the purposes of dealing with the civil emergencies.
Mayor, I make that motion to pass ordinance number 3428.
All right, do we have a second? We have a second by Chris Bivens, Councilman Bivens. Okay, for speaking, chair recognizes Paul Bell.
Well, I guess my question is, we're talking about how important this is to have someone that's designated, an assistant. What happens hypothetically if you and the city administrator get abducted? Who's going to declare civil emergency then?
Well, it'll be up to emergency management to do that at that point. Actually, it says in the charter, when we start out, it goes with mayor, and it goes on down. But I don't think that's gonna happen, but if you want to make a provision.
I was just asking, I mean, you're talking about researching this, and I'm just curious.
No, I don't think, what we researched is who was supposed to be designated. That's what.
So
the
if
city
you and
attorney-
Tony get abducted, who gets designated then?
I don't know, let's ask Matt.
Well, you can designate me, but I wouldn't recommend that.
That's a question the council would have to answer.
My suggestion is this: number one, I do not know if the law would say anything about it. I doubt it does. Number two, I guess when you do a will, you name an executor and a backup executor, but we don't carry 4 spare tires on our truck. I would assume that it would be up to the emergency management or something like that. But I would assume the city council, if it so chooses, has more than statutory authority to designate just as many backups as it would want. And if we want to do 3, I would think that would be appropriate as well.
So council has that option. If we want to name 5 or 6, all we can do it.
Well, I was just wondering,
Let's see. So we can designate however many you wish, if you like to think that.
no, you did the research, I just was asking.
Actually, I asked the city attorney to do the research. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, now, so let's see, Mr. Rebell, are you finished? There are any more discussion by council members? No more discussion? Call for the vote. All right. We have 5 yeas, 2 nays. Passes. Next, point of business will be awarding of bids and contracts. We'll have award of a bid for purchase of 2 sanitation trucks to Municipal Equipment Incorporated for the price of $125 each. You're gonna take that, Tony?